Hello, and welcome to this presentation on transformational servant leadership. The purpose of this presentation is to add to your effectiveness and practical application of both transformational and servant leadership. Here is a bit of my journey with the two leadership styles. During my doctoral program in organizational leadership, I found myself frustrated with trying to distinguish between the two leadership styles. It seemed that one would claim the same attributes as the other. So I set out in my doctoral research to distinguish the difference between the two styles. In fact, my dissertation was on distinguishing between transformational and servant leadership. As I set about my research journey for my dissertation, I had a bias that servant leadership was the way to be. But I soon found out that both leadership styles have attributes to offer the leader, and in fact, I discovered that I was more of a transformational leader. Both leadership styles are important and necessary to leading well. This presentation can help you discover which leadership style you prefer and how to balance it with the other leadership style. From my experiences in the corporate world, in ministry, in the academic realm, as well as being a coach and consultant, I've observed that leadership imbalances can be devastating to teams and to individuals. For example, I remember being on staff at a large mega church. It was exciting how we moved toward our vision and mission together. At the same time, the pace was devastating to people. It caused a lack of ability to be able to replenish and revitalize. While we expect this type of fast-paced movement in the corporate world, it can still cause drain to people's lives. These experiences caused me to question how a leader can balance their leadership. Also, I had some additional consulting experiences that were causing me to question the idea of balance. For instance, I remember working in a church as a consultant where the pastor was a strong visionary leader, and yet the board and individual members were frustrated with this individual for not being more of a shepherd. Soon after, I ended up consulting at another church where the pastor was a strong shepherd leader, and the board and some individual members were frustrated with that person for not being a stronger visionary leader. I began to see that leaders need to be both visionary as well as caring leaders. These stories prompted me to seek a way to explain how to balance these out as a leader. As we consider the core of what leadership is about, we need to keep in mind Philippians 2, verses 1 through 11. In these passages, Jesus modeled leadership as serving, sacrificing, and suffering. The leadership legacy to leave is to serve on behalf of the greater good and not serve on behalf of one's own interests. Serving, suffering, and sacrificing is key to biblical leadership, and it is a golden thread of all leadership practice. As I studied the leadership of Jesus in preparation for my dissertation topic, I noticed that Jesus adjusted his style. For example, in John 3, verses 1 through 21, Jesus was soft with Nicodemus, who was a Pharisee. Whereas in Matthew 23, Jesus was quite firm with the group of Pharisees in that passage. Then we see in Matthew 16, verse 23, or Mark 8, verse 33, that Jesus is firm with Peter in rebuking Satan in Peter's response. But then in John 21, verses 15 to 19, we see that Jesus is very soft and shepherding with Peter as he asks Peter to feed his lambs and care for his sheep. We see the same adaptability in Jesus' leadership styles with his disciples. For instance, in the gospel, Jesus' tenderness is shown as he washes the feet of the disciples. Yet in Matthew 10, verse 1, we see Jesus sending out the disciples as sheep among wolves. Jesus also adjusts his style with the crowds. In Matthew 15, verse 34, Jesus shepherds the people by first healing them and feeding them. Whereas in the Sermon on the Mount, or in Luke 6, Jesus begins with teaching the crowds rather than feeding them or healing them first. With individuals, Jesus also adapted his style. For instance, in Matthew 19, verse 16, Jesus interacts with the wealthy man and tries to teach him first. Whereas in Matthew 9 or Mark 2 or even Luke 5, we see that Jesus heals the paralytic first and then turns to others for a teaching moment. With the Samaritan woman at the well, Jesus was tender and personal with her, and yet then went into the Samaritan villages and taught the gospel and preached the word. Jesus knew how to perfectly balance his leadership style and where to start with each person or group that he encountered. The question for us is, how can we model this type of adaptability? I began my research by studying each of these leadership styles. Both of them were discovered around the same time, yet they had grown to become quite competitive with each other. As I studied an exorbitant amount of research and information on both styles, I discovered these 5 distinctions between the two. Through my deep dive into the literature, I came up with 19 scales that could potentially distinguish between transformational and servant leaders. Upon being analyzed, my research turned out to be quite strong and solid. I found that these 5 questions primarily distinguish between transformational and servant leaders. When these 5 questions are used, approximately 87% of the time, leaders will be correctly classified into either transformational or servant leadership. Let's now go through these questions together and have you assess yourself. Keep in mind there is no right or wrong here. It's more of which one is your preference. For the first question, do you believe that you are a leader that is primarily focused on meeting the needs of the organization first or the individual first? Leaders will tend to have a preference for meeting the needs of the organizational first or meeting the needs of the individual first. Which one do you prefer? Write your word down now. For question 2, do you believe that as a leader that your first inclination is to lead first or to serve first? Let me explain what that means. Leaders that lead first tend to start with vision, mission, and strategy with people. They tend to use those things to help people get on board. Does this describe your leadership? Do you tend to lead first? Keep in mind that we need leaders that lead first. Yet there is another style of leadership that desires to serve first. As a leader, do you tend to come alongside of other people, roll up your sleeves with them, and help them out? Could you be the type of leader that tends to serve others first in this way or other ways? Write down whether you see yourself as a lead first leader or a serve first leader. And please keep in mind that both are needed and not one is better than the other. Next question is, where is your focus? Do you believe as a leader that your first allegiance and focus is primarily towards the organization or the individual? Again, where's your primary loyalty? Do you tend to see the organization first that way, or do you tend to see the individual first that way? Again, please write down the word, either organization or individual, that best describes you. Fourth question, do you believe as a leader that you influence others through more customary or unconventional means? Let me explain what those terms mean. Customary influences of leadership are widely accepted in that the leader tends to use more vision, more charisma, and get people excited about moving forward towards the mission and the strategy. Do you influence others through more customary means? Or do you tend to be more unconventional in the way that you influence others? Unconventional means of influence include more coming alongside of people, working together with them, helping them out, thinking about their needs, and trying to find ways to serve them. Again, neither style of influence is right or wrong. Both are needed. It's just a matter of which one you prefer. Write down the term that describes you the best. The fifth and final question is, do you believe as a leader that your attempts to influence or persuade others come off as more controlling or freeing? Again, let me explain those terms. Both terms are positive and both terms are necessary in leadership. When we come off controlling in this context, it means that we're trying to help a group of people move together towards a common goal. And so therefore, there's a little more control around the team and around the group to move together instead of individuals going off on their own. So in this context, controlling means trying to move a group or a team together through vision, through strategy, and through collaborative efforts. In this particular question, freeing means the attempt to try to help the individual find their own purpose and passion, even outside of the group. Sometimes people need help discovering who they are individually and their individual identity and purpose and passion. So the leader who tends to influence with freedom first is trying to help individuals find their own place within the organization or the team. So would you say in this context that your influence tends to come off more controlling because you tend to try to bring groups collaboratively together as your first preference towards a common goal? Or do you tend to come off as more of a freeing leader because you tend to prefer working with individuals to help them find their own place in the organization or on the team? Which term best describes you? Let's now total up your score and discover which leadership style that you prefer. If you answered organization for number 1, lead for number 2, organization for number 3, customary for number 4, and or controlling for number 5, those describe transformational leaders. On the other hand, your response to 1 as individual, or to question 2 to serve, question 3 as individual, question 4 as unconventional, or question 5 as freeing, describes servant leadership. So go ahead and total up the number of times that you responded with terms that apply to transformational leadership, and then also total up the times that your replies equate with servant leadership. If you're feeling right in the middle between the two styles, keep in mind that you do have a preference, even if it's slight. So just go ahead and name your preference. Do you tend to be more of a transformational or a servant leader? Please take some time to reflect on these questions. Consider how, if the transformational focuses on the whole and the servant leader focuses on the individual, think for a moment what a great partnership that could be. Also, consider the beauty of developing people that both lead and serve. Consider how leadership, where vision is being cast, strategies being set, mission is on the forefront of the movement. Consider how, when that's balanced with service, which is caring for other people and focusing on other people, how that can be such a nice balance in an organization. In fact, both leading and serving can be grounded with looking out for the greater good of the whole. Reflect upon the important balance of being loyal to both the whole or the organization, as well as each individual in the organization. Also, consider the nice balance of influencing through both charisma as well as serving others. In fact, consider that charisma could be both an outward charisma and it can be an inward charisma, more of a quiet charisma. Think of the balance that can come to even charisma through thinking about both styles. Also, reflect upon the importance on teams where there is a collaborative control to bring about unity and oneness in the team, but there's also consideration of the individual and their freedom and autonomy to be their very best. For personal reflection, what might your style contribute to the other style of leadership? For example, if you're a transformational leader, what might your transformational leadership bring to the servant leader? And then, for additional reflection, what can the other style of leadership contribute to your leadership? Also, consider what practical ways you might apply this information now in your setting, whether your setting is home, work, or your community, or even church. And then how does this, or how might this work in your own organization to bring balance among leadership? Thank you for being part of this presentation on transformational servant leadership. Let me offer you some ways to get further information if you would like it. Upon completion of my dissertation, I was able to publish an article on the differences between transformational and servant leadership in the Leadership Organization Development Journal. Then I was inspired by the Lord to write the book, Bringing the Two Styles Together. So I wrote the book, Transformational Servant Leadership, which is available on Amazon or through Zulon Press, or you're free to contact me and I can sell you a copy. You can also check out my website for further articles and information, as well as my dissertation if you'd like to read it. And of course, feel free to email me if you have any questions. Thank you for listening, and I pray for God to help you be aware of your leadership preference here and to use you as you go out and help leaders to be balanced. And I pray for you in your becoming of a transformational servant leader that can work with both styles and be balanced in the organization that God puts you in charge of. Thank you, and have a great day.